High Admiral Kavresh of the Galactic Concordat stared at the holographic display with all four of her eyes, mandibles clicking in agitation. The sensor readings before her simply couldn't be correct. The vessel that had appeared at the edge of Concordat space defied every principle of shipbuilding she'd learned in her 2 centuries of service. "Run the analysis again," she ordered, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light as she leaned forward. "There must be an error in the sensor array. We've run it 12 times. Admiral," her chief sensor officer replied, his tentacles writhing in frustration. "The readings are consistent. That ship, it's real." The vessel in question hung in space like an optical illusion. Its hull was asymmetrical, with seemingly random protrusions and recesses that should have made it aerodynamically impossible. Energy signatures pulsed from it in chaotic patterns that suggested its power core should have gone critical hours ago. And yet there it was, not only intact but fully operational. What species would build such an abomination? Kavresh wondered aloud. The answer came from her intelligence officer, a soft-spoken meridian whose bioluminescent patterns shifted to indicate uncertainty. "Humans, Admiral." The vessel's IFF identifies it as the TNS Mobius. A ripple of unease passed through the command center. Humans were the newest species to join the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel barely 50 years ago. They were known for their unconventional approaches, but this was extreme even for them. "They're hailing us," the communications officer announced. "Text and audio only, no visual." Kavresh straightened her spine, her crystalline armor clicking into formal posture. "Put them through." The voice that filled the command center was surprisingly melodious, speaking in perfect Concordat standard. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the TNS Mobius. We apologize for any alarm our arrival may have caused. We're conducting a scheduled test flight of our new prototype vessel." Test flight. Kavresh's mandibles clicked rapidly, the equivalent of a human raising their eyebrows. "Your vessel appears to be experiencing multiple critical failures. Our sensors indicate." "Oh, those readings are normal," Captain Chen interrupted, a note of amusement in her voice. "The Mobius is functioning exactly as designed, though I understand why your systems might think otherwise." Before Kavresh could respond, her tactical officer's cadent plates rattled in alarm. "Admiral, 3 Drachnid raiders just dropped out of hyperspace. They're on an attack vector." The Drachnid were infamous pirates, using highly advanced ships to prey on border worlds. Even a well-armed Concordat patrol would have trouble with 3 of them. Kavresh began calculating evacuation vectors, and then stopped as she saw the Mobius move. The human ship's seemingly random protrusions suddenly shifted, its asymmetrical hull flowing like liquid metal. What had appeared to be structural weaknesses revealed themselves as weapon ports, but unlike anything the Admiral had ever seen. The chaotic energy readings intensified, but instead of causing a catastrophic overload, they formed patterns that made her sensor systems crash and restart. "Please allow us to demonstrate some of the Mobius's capabilities." Captain Chen's voice was calm, almost cheerful. "We've been hoping to conduct some weapons tests, and these raiders have volunteered themselves so nicely." What followed defied explanation. The Mobius moved in ways that violated every principle of spatial mechanics, its irregular hull somehow allowing it to execute maneuvers that should have torn any ship apart. Its weapons fired in impossible sequences, each shot seeming to curve through space itself. The Drachnid raiders, with their sophisticated targeting systems and advanced shields, never stood a chance. Their computers, designed to predict enemy movements and calculate optimal firing solutions, couldn't make sense of a ship that deliberately broke every rule of space combat. Within minutes, all 3 raiders were disabled, their systems scrambled by weapons that seemed to ignore conventional physics. As Kavresh watched in stunned silence, the Mobius resumed its original position, its hull flowing back into its seemingly chaotic configuration. Captain Chen's voice returned, still cheerful. "We'd appreciate if you could send some ships to pick up the raiders. Our brig isn't really configured for Drachnid physiology. A pause. Also, Admiral, if you're interested, I'd be happy to have you aboard for a tour. There's much more to the Mobius than what your sensors can detect, though I should warn you, our artificial gravity is unconventional. Kavresh looked at the sensor readings, which were still trying to make sense of what they'd just recorded, then at her staff, who appeared as bewildered as she felt. After 4 decades commanding Concordat forces, she'd thought she'd seen everything space had to offer. She'd been wrong. Captain Chen, she said finally, I believe I would very much like to see this ship of yours up close. Though I suspect I'm about to learn that everything I know about spacecraft design is more flexible than I believed. The human captain's laugh was warm and genuine. Admiral, you have no idea. Welcome to the future of space travel, where the rules are more like guidelines, and impossible is just another word for hasn't been tried yet. Dr. Maya Patel stood in her workshop aboard the TNS Mobius, surrounded by holograms that seemed to defy spatial geometry. Her dark eyes sparkled with amusement as she watched Admiral Kavresh attempt to process what she was seeing. The crystalline alien's exoskeleton had taken on a fascinating iridescent pattern that Maya suspected indicated extreme cognitive dissonance. You deliberately designed it to be wrong? Kavresh asked, her translator struggling to convey the mix of horror and fascination in her voice. Not wrong, Maya corrected, gesturing at the suspended hologram of the Mobius's power core. Different. See, everyone else tries to achieve perfect stability in their ship designs. We went the opposite direction. We embraced instability as a feature. She manipulated the hologram, showing how energy flowed through the ship in patterns that resembled natural phenomena more than engineering. Look at how a river moves around obstacles. It doesn't fight them, it adapts. We built the Mobius to do the same thing with space itself. Captain Chen, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Show her the metamorphic hull system, Maya. That's my favorite part. Maya grinned and switched the display. The Mobius's outer hull appeared, its seemingly random protrusions and recesses shifting like a living thing. Traditional ships try to maintain structural integrity by being as rigid as possible. We looked at how Earth's sea creatures change their shape to move through water efficiently. Then we thought, why not apply that to space? But the computational power required to maintain such a system. Kavresh's mandibles clicked rapidly. Would be impossible using conventional computers, Maya nodded. That's why we don't use them. The Mobius's hull is controlled by a hybrid system that combines quantum computing with biological neural networks derived from octopus chromatophores. It doesn't calculate changes, it feels them. The Admiral's exoskeleton shifted to a deeper shade of blue. You made your warship intuitive. Exactly. Maya's enthusiasm was infectious. That's why your sensors can't make sense of us. They're looking for patterns, but we're deliberately patternless. The ship adapts to spatial conditions the way a dancer adapts to music. She brought up another display, showing the aftermath of their encounter with the Drachnid raiders. See how the hull morphed to absorb their weapon fire. Instead of trying to deflect or block it, we let the energy flow through specifically designed channels, using it to power our own systems. The more they attacked, the stronger we became. Kivresh studied the data with all 4 eyes. This violates at least 15 fundamental principles of starship engineering. Only 15. Maya laughed. I must be losing my touch. We were aiming for at least 20. The Admiral's translator took a moment to process the humor, but then she made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Your reputation for unconventional thinking seems well-deserved, Doctor. But surely this level of adaptation makes the ship difficult to control. Not at all, Captain Chen interjected. That's the beauty of Maya's design. The ship works with us, not for us. It's like having a partner in dance rather than a tool. Once you understand its rhythm, controlling it becomes almost instinctive. Maya pulled up another hologram, this one showing the Mobius's bridge. Instead of traditional control stations, The crew interfaces resembled musical instruments more than military hardware. We designed the control systems around how humans actually think and move. No more forcing operators to adapt to rigid, standardized interfaces. The ship adapts to each crew member's natural patterns. And the artificial gravity? Kavresh asked, her stance suggesting she was still trying to find her balance. Ah, that. Maya's smile turned slightly mischievous. We don't actually generate artificial gravity in the conventional sense. The ship creates localized space-time distortions that mimic gravitational effects. It's more efficient than traditional systems, though it does take some getting used to. She manipulated the controls, and suddenly the workshop's gravity shifted, flowing like water around them. Kavresh's crystalline legs automatically adjusted, and her exoskeleton flickered with surprise. That's remarkable, the Admiral admitted. But surely the energy requirements for all these systems must be enormous. Actually, no. Maya brought up the power distribution diagrams. By working with natural spatial phenomena instead of against them, we use significantly less energy than conventional designs. The Mobius doesn't fight physics. It dances with it. Captain Chen stepped closer to the holograms. Tell her about the inspiration, Maya. I think she'll appreciate that part. Ah, yes. Maya's expression softened. The entire design philosophy came from watching my grandmother's cat. It could fall from any height and land perfectly, not because it calculated trajectories, but because it instinctively understood and worked with physical forces. I thought, why can't we build ships that do the same thing? Kavresh's exoskeleton shifted through several colors before settling on a deep purple that Maya was beginning to recognize as profound contemplation. You based a revolutionary starship design on a pet. On observation of natural adaptation, Maya corrected gently. Nature solved many of these problems billions of years ago. We just needed to stop thinking we knew better and start learning from it instead. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, studying the flowing holograms. The Concordat's Engineering Council will want to study this technology extensively. Of course, Maya nodded. Though I should warn you, understanding the principles is one thing. Accepting them enough to actually use them, that's going to require a fundamental shift in how you think about space travel. Dr. Patel, Kavresh's translator managed to convey a tone of wry amusement. I believe you've already begun that process. I'm not sure I'll ever look at a properly designed ship the same way again. Maya's smile widened. Good. That's exactly what we were hoping for. After all, the first step. The emergency alert pulsed through the TNS Mobius's neural network like an electric current. Captain Chen felt it before she heard it, the ship's intuitive interface translating spatial disturbance into a visceral sensation that jolted her awake in her quarters. Status report, she called out, already moving. The ship's gravity shifted with her movement, helping rather than hindering her rapid progress to the bridge. Massive quantum surge detected at the edge of the Helios colony system. Her first officer, Commander David Okonjo, reported as she entered. Local defense forces are reporting multiple vessels emerging from some kind of artificial singularity. They're not responding to hails. Admiral Kavresh, who had remained aboard for extended observation of the Mobius, stood at the rear of the bridge. Her crystalline exoskeleton had taken on a deep red hue that suggested serious concern. The energy signatures matched the cipher, she said, her translator barely keeping up with her rapid clicks. A species we've encountered only in ancient records. They were thought to be extinct. The main display shifted, showing massive vessels of impossible geometry emerging from tiers in spacetime. Unlike the Mobius's controlled chaos, these ships radiated wrongness, their very presence seeming to distort the fabric of reality around them. The Helios colony has 20 million inhabitants, Kavresh continued. The nearest Concordat battle fleet is 3 hours away at maximum speed. Good thing we're already here then. Maya's voice came through the ship's internal network. Down in engineering, she was already adapting the Mobius's systems for combat. Captain, permission to try something absolutely crazy. Sarah Chen smiled, feeling the ship's neural network pulse with anticipation. Dr. Patel, on this ship, crazy is practically our standard operating procedure. Do it. The Mobius's hull began to shift, its metamorphic structure flowing into configurations that even Maya hadn't tested yet. The quantum biological hybrid computer core started processing spatial data in ways that made conventional sensors spark with confusion. The Sci-Fi were masters of spatial manipulation. Maya explained as she worked. Their ships don't just travel through space. They rewrite it, but they rely on precise mathematical patterns to do it. So we show them what happens when you throw math out the window. Sarah finished. Commander Okanjo, battle stations. Admiral, you might want to hold onto something. This is going to get weird. The Mobius accelerated toward the Sci-Fi fleet, its movement more akin to a leaf riding wind currents than a warship's usual direct approach. The enemy vessels, each easily 20 times the size of the human ship, turned their attention toward this new threat. They're scanning us, David reported. Their energy readings are off the charts. They're trying to. What the hell? The space around the Sci-Fi ships began to twist, reality itself seeming to fold according to their will. A normal ship would have been torn apart by the spatial distortions, but the Mobius wasn't normal. They're using fixed algorithms to manipulate space-time. Maya's voice was filled with excitement. Complex ones, but still predictable. Captain, remember how you said the ship feels like dancing? Time to show them some really fancy footwork. The Mobius's hull rippled, each seemingly random protrusion and recess now serving as a spatial anchor point. Instead of fighting against the Sci-Fi's reality warping effects, the ship began to move with them, using their own distortions as pathways. Impossible. Kovresh whispered, watching as the human vessel navigated what should have been certain destruction. They're surfing on spatial distortions. Better than that, Maya replied. We're reflecting their patterns back at them, but with controlled irregularities, like throwing a handful of sand into precisely calibrated machinery. The Sci-Fi ships responded with weapons that bent light and twisted gravity, but where their attacks should have annihilated the Mobius, they instead found their energy absorbed and redirected through the ship's adaptive hull. Each assault made the human vessel's countermeasures stronger, more unpredictable. Their systems are designed to calculate and counter any known form of attack, Sarah explained, her hands dancing across the organic-looking control interface. But we're not attacking. We're improvising. The Mobius spun through the chaos like a leaf in a hurricane, each movement seemingly random but serving a precise purpose. Its weapons fired in patterns that violated cause and effect, striking the Sci-Fi ships from angles that shouldn't have existed. Their shields are failing, David reported, his voice filled with disbelief. They can't adapt to our attack pattern because there is no pattern. On the main display, the massive Sci-Fi vessels began to show signs of distress. Their reality warping fields flickered as the Mobius's chaotic approach disrupted their carefully calculated spatial manipulations. One by one, their systems began to fail, unable to cope with a form of combat that defied their fundamental understanding of how space warfare should work. They're retreating, Kovresh announced, her exoskeleton now pulsing with colors that suggested a mix of awe and disbelief. The Sci-Fi, a species that nearly conquered the galaxy eons ago, are retreating from a single human vessel. Not retreating, Sarah corrected, watching the enemy ships desperately try to recreate their spatial tiers. Running, because for the first time in their existence, they've encountered something they can't quantify, can't predict, and therefore can't control. As the last Sci-Fi ship vanished back through its singularity, Maya's laughter echoed through the ship's neural network. Think we violated enough laws of physics for one day, Captain? I don't know, Doctor, Sarah replied, feeling the Mobius's systems already adapting to incorporate the new experiences into its quantum biological matrix. I think we might have just invented some new ones. Admiral Kovresh stepped forward, her translator struggling to find words for what she'd witnessed. When I first saw this ship, I thought it was an engineering abomination. Now I understand. It's not an abomination at all. It's evolution. The Mobius drifted through the quantum storm, its metamorphic hull struggling to adapt to the most intense spatial disturbance ever recorded. In engineering, Maya Patel's hands flew across her interface console, trying to keep the ship's systems functioning as reality itself seemed to tear apart around them. The quantum biological core is approaching critical stability thresholds, she reported, her usual enthusiasm replaced by intense concentration. The ship's trying to adapt, but these conditions are beyond anything we designed for. On the bridge, Captain Chen watched the storm's impossible patterns twist across their sensor displays. The cipher's final act of desperation had been to detonate a reality-warping weapon, creating a cascade of spatial anomalies that threatened to tear apart the fabric of space-time around the Helios colony. "Status of the evacuation?" she asked, feeling the ship shudder as another wave of distortions washed over them. 80% complete, Commander Okonjo reported, his dark features illuminated by the storm's ethereal light. "But the colony's shields are failing. They won't last another 30 minutes. Admiral Kavresh, who had refused to leave despite the danger, stepped forward. Her crystalline form refracted the quantum storm's light in dazzling patterns. "The Concordat fleet is still too far out. If we can't find a way to contain this storm, we'll lose the entire system." Maya's voice came through the neural network again, tight with both worry and determined focus. "Captain, I have an idea. It's either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both." "Those are my favorite kinds of ideas, Doctor," Sarah replied, feeling the ship's neural interface pulse with a mix of strain and anticipation. "What are you thinking?" The Mobius's hull was designed to adapt to spatial conditions, right? To dance with physics instead of fighting it. Maya's words came faster as she developed her theory. "What if we stop trying to resist the storm and instead become it?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she understood. "You want to deliberately destabilize our containment systems, push past the safety limits." "More than that," Maya replied. "I want to completely invert our spatial adaptation protocols. Instead of the ship adapting to space, we make space adapt to the ship." Commander Okonjo's eyes widened. "That's insane. The power requirements alone would be met by the storm itself." Kavresh interrupted, her exoskeleton shifting to a color that indicated sudden understanding. "Just as you used the cipher's own attacks to power your counterstrikes." "Exactly." Maya's excitement was returning. "But there's a catch. The quantum biological core wasn't designed for this level of feedback. We'd need to manually modulate the spatial fields, and the neural interface would have to be enhanced." Sarah understood immediately. "You're saying whoever interfaces with the ship during this attempt would be directly exposed to the quantum effects. Their consciousness would become part of the stabilization matrix." "Yes." Maya's voice softened. "And there's no guarantee their mind would survive the process intact." The bridge fell silent except for the sound of the storm raging around them. Then Sarah stood, her movement decisive. "How long to make the modifications?" "Captain." "No," David protested. "As your first officer, I cannot allow." "You're not allowing anything, Commander." Sarah cut him off gently. "I'm giving you an order. Begin Emergency Protocol Alpha 7. You'll have command once I enter the interface. 10 minutes to modify the systems," Maya reported. "But Sarah, the human brain isn't meant to process quantum spatial mechanics directly. Even if this works, you might not come back whole." Sarah smiled, already feeling the ship's neural network responding to her determination. "Dr. Patel, you built this ship to break every rule in the book. Time to break a few more." The next 10 minutes passed in a blur of desperate activity. Maya's modifications transformed the bridge's neural interface into something that looked more like a chrysalis than a control system. The metamorphic hull flowed like liquid metal, reorganizing itself around the new configuration. As Sarah prepared to enter the enhanced interface, Admiral Kavaresh approached her. "The Concordat has no protocols for this situation," she said, her translator struggling to convey the complexity of her emotions. "We would sacrifice the system to preserve the established order of space-time." "Good thing humans have never been very good at following protocols then," Sarah replied. She turned to her first officer. "David, if this doesn't work, get our people home." Before he could respond, she stepped into the interface. The chrysalis-like structure flowed around her, and suddenly her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of her human brain. She was the ship, the storm, the very fabric of space-time itself. The pain was extraordinary, reality itself burning through her neural pathways. But Sarah held on, using the ship's quantum biological systems as an extension of her own mind. She felt the storm's patterns, its chaotic energies trying to tear reality apart. And then, drawing on everything that made the Mobius unique, she began to dance with it. The ship's hull flowed like water, each transformation sending ripples through space-time itself. Where the storm sought to destroy, Sarah guided those energies into new patterns, using the Mobius's adaptive technology to reshape the quantum cascade into something controllable. Through the haze of merged consciousness, she heard Maya's voice. "It's working. The storm's energy patterns are stabilizing, but the captain's neural patterns are becoming dangerously erratic." "Hold on, Sarah." David's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Just a little longer." Sarah barely heard them. She was too busy conducting an impossible symphony of quantum forces, using the storm's own power to seal the gaps in space-time. The Mobius moved through the chaos like a leaf riding a hurricane, but now the hurricane itself was changing, responding to the ship's influence. Just when it seemed her mind would shatter under the strain, Sarah felt the pattern shift. The storm wasn't just stabilizing. It was collapsing in on itself, the quantum cascade reversing as space-time began to heal. The last thing she heard before consciousness fled was Maya's triumphant cry. She did it. The storm's dissipating. Someone get her out of that interface now. 3 months after the quantum storm incident, the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concordat was packed with representatives from over 200 spacefaring species. They had gathered to witness something unprecedented. The first major revision to the universal shipbuilding standards in over 10,000 years. At the center of the hall, Captain Sarah Chen stood beside Dr. Maya Patel, both still showing signs of their ordeal. Sarah's hair had turned completely white from her merger with the quantum interface, and occasional spatial distortions flickered around her like heat waves, a lasting reminder of her consciousness's brief expansion beyond normal spacetime. But her eyes were clear and sharp as ever. "The human consciousness is remarkably adaptable," Admiral Kavaresh observed from her position at the High Council's podium. Her crystalline exoskeleton now bore intricate patterns that marked her as the newly appointed Director of Irregular Warfare Development. "Much like your ship, Captain Chen, you survived by breaking all the rules about what should be possible." Sarah smiled, the expression carrying echoes of the vast perspective she gained during her fusion with the quantum storm. "Rules exist to create order from chaos, Admiral. But sometimes chaos itself has patterns we can work with if we're willing to see them." Maya stepped forward, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the hall. The Mobius appeared, but now accompanied by dozens of new designs, each one incorporating elements of its revolutionary technology. "What we learned from the Mobius project goes beyond simple ship design," Maya explained to the assembled representatives. "It's about reconsidering our fundamental assumptions about how we interact with space-time itself." The display shifted, showing footage from the quantum storm incident. Many of the representatives stirred uneasily at the sight of reality tearing itself apart, but they watched in fascination as the Mobius transformed the destruction into a new kind of order. "Traditional shipbuilding focuses on imposing our will on space," Maya continued. "We build rigid structures, force artificial order on natural phenomena, and treat physics as something to be conquered. The Mobius showed us another way, working with the inherent patterns of the universe instead of against them. Commander Okonjo, now captain of his own ship built on Mobius principles, added his perspective. It's not just about the technology. It's about changing how we think about space travel itself. Every crew member on a Mobius-class vessel has to unlearn their assumptions about what's possible. The holographic display updated again, showing the first graduating class of the new Adaptive Space Initiative, a joint program between human and Concordat engineers. Among them were species from all corners of the galaxy, each bringing their own unique perspectives to this revolutionary approach. The Cipher believed they could control reality by imposing mathematical perfection on it, Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had experienced space-time from the inside. Their defeat wasn't just about superior technology. It was about the triumph of adaptation over rigid control. Admiral Kavresh raised all four arms for silence as murmurs swept through the hall. The Council has reviewed the data from both the Cipher encounter and the quantum storm incident. Our conclusions are clear. The future of space travel lies not in perfecting our current methods, but in fundamentally reimagining them. She turned to Sarah and Maya, which is why today, we're not just changing our shipbuilding standards. We're creating an entirely new classification of vessels. Living ships, ships that adapt, learn, and evolve, just as life itself has always done. Maya's eyes sparkled with unshed tears as she watched her revolution unfold. The display showed construction already underway at shipyards throughout Concordat space. Vessels with flowing, organic lines and neural networks that blended the boundaries between ship and crew. There will be challenges, Sarah acknowledged, absently reaching out to touch one of the spatial distortions that still flickered around her. Learning to think in new ways isn't easy. I know that better than anyone. But the universe itself is constantly changing, constantly adapting. Isn't it time our ships did the same? The assembly hall erupted in discussion, but the outcome was already clear. The rigid standardization that had dominated space travel for millennia was giving way to something new, something that embraced chaos as a tool rather than an enemy. As the session concluded, Admiral Kavresh approached the two humans privately. The Mobius was called an abomination when it first appeared in our space, she said, her exoskeleton shimmering with what they now recognized as amusement. I suppose that's often the first reaction to revolutionary ideas. It won't be the last time we surprise you, Maya promised, already working on new designs in her mind. Humans have a saying. The only constant is change. Sarah nodded, feeling the quantum echoes in her consciousness resonating with possibilities yet unexplored. We didn't just build a new kind of ship, she said softly. We opened a door. What comes next? That's the real adventure. Above them, through the assembly hall's transparent dome, stars sparkled in the void. But now, instead of an empty expanse to be conquered, space itself seemed alive with potential. A dance partner waiting for those brave enough to learn its steps.